Hi, I'm Barry Anderson with Barry Andersen Studios, and I would like to talk today about basically integrity of photography. Now, while I really respect photojournalists and going out and doing their job out in the field, sometimes at risk of death, going to war zones and getting some very, very memorable historical shots, pictures that people just remember because it's so iconic for the historicity's sake, or perhaps the shock or the feeling that you get from knowing about the situation from that photograph at the moment. But as far as integrity in photography is concerned, there's plenty of ways that even with something like an AP standard, you can be very deceiving in the way that you go about what you choose to photograph as a photographer. Now, of course, there are a lot of people out there that think that if it's by AP standard, it's going to be the best way to photograph anything if you're going to be a journalist. And it's like, in my opinion, that's true. But at the same time, can you still deceive with a photograph without still meeting those standards? And my answer, of course, is you still can. And there are plenty of ways, but the easiest one is you're limited to a very small fraction of time that you take a photograph. Even if it's like a long exposure, you don't see much, but either way, it's a fraction of time that's printed onto a two-dimensional surface like a painting that's representative of a three-dimensional reality. And it's in a single frame, unlike video, which I'm recording with right now, which is multiple frames in a second to make it seem like I'm moving, give the impression of motion. That can't be done in a single frame. So there's multiple ways in which to manipulate that kind of information. One is the framing. One is by zooming in really close and getting, like, say, two subjects. Like, say there was a big scene where there's a huge protest going on between let's say Western Bank, where the West Bank, where in Israel, right? And you see like a child and a tank, and you choose to photograph the child and the tank, but if you were to zoom out or shoot it at a wider angle, you'd see a huge mob behind that child. Now, of course, the deception there is the focus of the piece, right? Do you choose to photograph the mob with the child in front of it, the tank, or do you photograph just the child in the tank? And based on how you photograph or frame that, changes the entire way in which you view the situation. There is a very famous photo which calls into the ethics of photography itself, where basically the photojournalist took a picture of a boy about to, with a vulture standing right in front of the boy. And this was in, I believe, Somalia or Ethiopia, I can't remember which. And the boy was about to be eaten. The vulture was waiting for the kid to die. And of course people were outraged because it's like, why didn't you feed the boy? Even if the boy would have been fed within the 20 minutes of the rest of his life that he was on this earth, there's no way that even if the journalists had food, they'd be able to help with the situation. In that situation, would you go out and feed the child? Most situations you probably would as a journalist, but even then you're changing. I don't know if that meets the AP standards or not, but my point is that photo caused a lot of controversy, and even with the thousands of people that were dying from malnourishment and not having any food because of the drought, it was framed on that one boy and the vulture, and that was the story. And it was really putting it into human perspective. Very, very powerful and emotional for a lot of people. But again, that's not the only boy that died probably that week, or in that, definitely not in that entire year in that country. So Again, how you frame the photograph and how far you zoom into the subject will change the nature of how you perceive the situation. If you were to, that's one of the problems with photography too, like Gary Winogrand said, is that you're framing this one single moment out of an entire day into a single frame. And every frame is going to look different from one to the next. And the limitation is, the limitations are the ones that I already mentioned before. But, there's other things that you can do as well. For example, if you go from a 200mm zoom to a 400mm zoom, the objects, say there's an object right in front of another, those objects will look closer with a higher focal length. If you were to go shoot a war zone, and you said that a person behind this person in front was about to assassinate a guy, right? It's a difference between thinking that it happened in an instant versus happening, the guy running up on him and maybe shooting him in the back or something. My point is, your perception of what actually happened can change by also varying the focal length. So I don't know if there's an AP standard for zoom levels, but depending on the amount of zoom, you can change the nature of how you're viewing things as well. Let's say you get a photograph in black and white, not to mention that there's other types of monochrome images that may or may not meet AP standards, and they're arbitrary because technically speaking, you can make a white and red image, a white and blue image, a purple and white image, and those are still considered monochrome images. We just happen to carry on the tradition of black and white as because it relates to the silver halide process as a tradition, so we don't accept other forms of chromatic imagery as acceptable, I guess. But anyways, that gives tribute to the AP standards being arbitrary. But at the same time, say you did get a picture in black and white, and that does technically meet the AP standards because those objects were there and so on. If you change the contrast, let's say a person was holding up a white dove with gloves, right? And you change the contrast, you increase the contrast, the detail of the feathers disappear. Now, on the image, does that mean they disappear in three-dimensional reality? Of course not. It means that, like, say you only see the edges of the feathers from the wingtips and you get the impression of the feathers. It doesn't mean that the feathers have disappeared. It means that your impression of them have disappeared because of the photograph, because of the contrast of the photograph. Now, how can this have any implications anywhere else? Well, of course, in any kind of image processing, you can lose detail, and that might change the way you view the image. That might change the perception of the image because of the information lost in that image. So what I'm saying is, even with the harshest AP standards, like or harshest journalistic standards, you're still changing the way that the image looks. And even with the biggest amount of journalistic integrity, you can change the perception of an image. And my point is simply that there is manipulation. There are plenty of ways that you can manipulate a photograph to change the perspective of how you, the viewer, perceive it. So, anywho, I just wanted to touch up on that and make a video on the subject. And I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm Barry with Barry Andersen Studios. Until next time.